So the utility of the trait depends on the structure of the environment that surrounds it. And that's why there's variability in traits. And so you have to be careful when you're thinking about it from a strict scientific perspective to make the assumption that positioning at any place on the normal distribution is preferable to positioning anywhere else. Now, one exception to that might be IQ. Because one of the things that you can see with IQ is that people with higher IQs seem to do better, but that's also only true in complex societies. And then there's another problem that seems to emerge with IQ, and I don't know exactly what to make of this, but we know that as women's IQ increases, the probability that they're going to remain without a mate also increases, because women tend to mate across or up dominance hierarchies. And so if you're a woman with an IQ of 130, then you've already eliminated about 95% of the men. And that's only using one criteria. That's just straight intelligence. And so there also might be limitations to the utility of intelligence with regards to reproduction that we don't really understand very well yet. So anyway, so you get the point. So there's these underlying, I kind of put down two value structures there. Capitalize on social groups, that would be an extroverted value structure, say, and maintain order, that would be a conscientious strategy. And conscientious people are going to want to maintain order because they don't want things to shift across time, because if they shift too much across time, then the things that have been stored up for the future start to become increasingly irrelevant. There's lots of other reasons to maintain order as well, but that's one of them. So, all right, so that your cognitive ability allows you to do modeling. Now, this is where human beings have leaped ahead of their competition. So animals can think, but it isn't exactly obvious how they think. They think strategically. I think they think the same way that children think, in some sense, when they're playing with Legos, when they're not thinking about the Legos, when they're just moving them around. We know, like, if you watch a smart predator group like lions go after their target, or watch chimpanzees hunt down a monkey, you can see intelligence at work, because hunting behavior is very, very complicated, obviously, especially if you're chasing something intelligent. But there isn't that level of abstract representation. So let's look at this. So here's a picture of the human brain with someone facing this way, right? So here's the primary motor cortex. Okay, so you're using that to voluntarily move your body. Okay, now then I might say to you, close your eyes and imagine doing something. So just close your eyes and imagine picking up the cup that's in front of you and just visualize it. Okay, so then you might say, well, what part of your brain are you using then? And the answer is, use part of this part, because that's where you have your body represented. But use this part here, the premotor cortex, to envision potential actions. Now what's happened is that this part of the brain evolved out of this part. And that makes sense, because the first part is just how you would move, but the second part is how you would think about how you would move. And then the next part, which is this part, huge in human beings, is how you would think about how you would think about how you would move. So, because that enables you to start to do extraordinarily abstract planning. So I could say, well, envision how you would pick up the cup. And obviously that's something that you've separated out as a potential simulation from the actual action. But we can talk about extraordinarily high-level abstractions that have effects across multiple specific domains way into the future. And the more abstract that your manipulations become, the more they seem to be moved away, say, from the primary motor cortex out into the prefrontal cortex. Hierarchies of abstraction. And the reason for that, as this was Karl Popper, this is really, really worth thinking about. Why think? Let's say you're an animal and you act and it doesn't go very well, and then you die. Well, you've learned that acting that way didn't work, but now you're dead. So that's not that helpful. And then you might think, well, maybe you should represent how you're going to act. So, here's a box with a snake in it, and your coffee cup is inside the box with the snake in it. And I say to you, imagine picking up the coffee cup, and you imagine it, and you think, oh, I'll pick up that coffee cup, and then the snake will bite me, and I'll die. And so then you decide that implementing the strategy of picking up the coffee cup is probably not a very good idea, and so that stupid idea has to die, and not you. And so Popper's idea was that the reason that we developed the capacity to abstract was so that our stupid ideas could die instead of us. And that's really, it's almost impossible to overstate how brilliant an observation that is. Because what it means is that, like, as a standard animal, you would have to produce variants of yourself reproductively to go out into the world and try their hand at survival. And that's pretty costly because you have to produce all the biological replications of you. So you could only probably manage that maybe 13 times if you really, really worked at it. And then the cost of their failure is extraordinarily high because they die. Well, you can just sit there and produce like 20 different versions of you extending out over the next week or the next month, and you can run them through a simulation and kill off all the ones that you don't regard as suitable and then only implement the successful ones. Now, you know, you could debate about how accurate you might be at doing that because it would depend on your knowledge, but we do know that intelligent people tend to do better across the course of their life. And so it does seem that there is some utility with regards to survival, or at least with regards to positioning in the dominance hierarchy, which is somewhat of a proxy for survival and for reproductive success. There's some association between that and the ability to abstract. So we could say that part of the reason that people got smarter was because smarter people were more likely to stay alive. Now, I think it's more complicated than that too, because I believe that human males and females are in an evolutionary cognitive arms race, roughly speaking. And so as men get trickier, women get trickier to understand them, and then as women get trickier to understand, men get trickier to understand them. And so we've been chasing each other around this cortical expansion loop pretty much since we parted ways with the ancestor that we had in common with chimpanzees. And so that's roughly about 7 million years ago. We've undergone a tremendous cortical expansion since then. And there's lots of reasons that have been propelling that.